We are now recording. All right, well, welcome everybody to our first virtual Lada.net users group. This is our first time doing this, obviously, and it's our first time playing around with doing a Teams meeting as the way in which we're going to do this. We're looking at some possible other options as well with Teams live events. So if we can work the kinks out of that, we'll move up to that as well. It gives us some additional functionality, but this should work pretty well, even if this is all we have to work with. Hopefully everybody can hear everybody okay. If you could, that way I can tell you're paying attention. How about a quick show of hands? Press the little hand button to let me know that you can hear us okay. Oh, a bunch of hands. That's awesome.
Huh.
Okay, put your hands down. That's kind of freaky. Simon says, put your hand up. Simon says. That works awesome. Go on, Rose, put your hand down. I can see you. All right, so I don't have a lot to talk about this evening other than, we're going to try and make this work. I think if you were listening a few minutes ago, we're recording this, so I'm going to try and make that available online as well. And that'll be something that we might be able to carry forward. We're sort of looking at this as a way of addressing some requests we've had for years about, hey, could you record things? Hey, could you make them available online, even when we have in-person meetings? And so I think if we can work out the kinks by kind of being forced to, that we should be able to keep this going even once the doors are open again. So we'll see. Next month, we've got Supercharging ASP.NET Core, and that's going to be with Nolan Egley of Headspring. So it'd be a guest speaker there. And we have a few other talks lined up that I haven't published yet, but having to recheck things with speakers because of, life. But for this evening, I'm just going to turn this on over to Brad and kick it off with Flutter.
All right. I believe, what do I do? Request control?
You should be able to hit share. And
I see. Yep.
Just do your thing. Might not be as fancy looking this time.
Practice this earlier, huh?
Right.
All right. Thank you, Ken. As he said, this is intro to Flutter. I think we called it Curious About Flutter. I am Brad Dean. I think most of you have met me, did a talk. I don't know, when was that, last year, Ken?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I work with LivePerson. If you don't know LivePerson, if you've ever been to a website and they've got that little, little thing in the corner that says chat with us, most of the time if you see that, that's us. We run that technology that lets consumers and brands talk to each other. And I will take this opportunity to say we have a lot of job openings right now. It's a really good time to be making software that lets people talk to brands and lets customer service agents work from home when all of the call centers have been closed and all of those agents have been sent home. So if you're a developer currently looking for a job and are interested in real-time messaging software, definitely check us out at LivePerson.
Would those be remote positions, Brad?
There are a lot of remote positions because we are all working from home right now as well. Our office is actually right across the street from Microsoft Alpharetta. You literally just walk right across the street. But we're all remote right now. So that's what led us to Flutter, actually, was we have a couple of internal mobile applications and a couple of external applications. And we had one iOS native app, and we had a lot of customers that were asking us for an Android application. And we had to make the decision, okay, what do we do? Do we start over and make an Android app to complement our iOS app? And the iOS app hadn't been touched in a long time. the team that made it was no longer around, so we had to even then ramp up a new team for iOS. So it made a lot of sense to look at the hybrid technologies like Flutter. And I will spoil the ending and say we did not pick Flutter. we actually went with Xamarin simply because we had a lot of C# code that made Xamarin make sense. But Flutter was one of the ones we looked at, which led to this talk. And it ended up being a really fun framework. It's a lot of fun to play with. And if we hadn't had that existing C# code that we needed to bring in, it may very well have been the one we picked. It works really well. So Flutter has support for Android and iOS, of course. That's the main thing that people are looking for. It competes with the Xamarin and React Native frameworks, but it also has support for web, which is currently in beta, and then desktop, which is, let's say, an early alpha. They describe it as a UI toolkit. It's created by Google. It uses Dart, which almost none of us have heard of, but we'll get into that later. And then when you're debugging, it uses just-in-time compilation and has really, really good support for hot reload. Xamarin's just recently gotten good at hot reload. If you're used to React Native, which has excellent hot reload, it's even better than that. It's instant. And then, of course, in production mode, it does AOT compilation so that it's compiled. The documentation is probably the best thing it's got going for it now. Google has documented every single feature, and a lot of the features have videos, whether it's full videos on implementing something, or a lot of things just have these quick little 1-minute snippets on how to implement something. And then one thing I'll actually jump over just to show, because I really like it, is when you go to the documentation, they have this section called From Another Platform. So if you're an Android developer jumping over to Flutter, then they have this whole section on how do you move to Flutter from Android. And they say, okay, what's the equivalent of a view in Flutter? And they show you, as an Android developer, what is it? And what's the equivalent of run on UI thread in Flutter? And they show you the code in Android and then the equivalent code in Dart in Flutter. And they have this for every framework, including iOS, React Native, and Xamarin Forms. And then there's everything you can do in Xamarin Forms, and then the equivalent in Flutter. And what's really cool is they even took the time to write this up for web developers. So if you've never written a mobile app, but you know HTML and JavaScript, they have this complete section that takes you from HTML and CSS and then shows you how you do that in mobile on Flutter. So it's this great introduction on how you get experience in Android and iOS with Flutter as an introduction, which is really hard to do on Xamarin and React Native. A lot of times when we're bringing a developer into the team, the biggest problem they have is not with Xamarin. The problem they have is learning the different paradigm of mobile, because it really is a learning curve. And then they have plugins. I have here Visual Studio Code, but it's actually Visual Studio Code as well as IntelliJ. They have plugins for both of those IDEs, and they're really well done. I'll show that as well as we go through the code. I spent some time trying to gauge the popularity, and it's really hard to track down. If you look at, all three of the hybrid frameworks are open source. And if you look at how many GitHub stars they have, Flutter has more GitHub stars. When we were first looking at doing this talk, I forget when I was first scheduled, but I looked at this early in December, and React Native had a lot more stars. And now Flutter has more stars, but it could just be that the Flutter community is more overzealous. If you look on Stack Overflow, just recently, there's more questions on Stack Overflow. But again, that could just be it's a more confusing framework. If you look on Hacker News, stories on React Native in the green have been shared more often, But you can definitely see the blue Flutter. It's starting to get more popular. If you look on the Reddit subreddits, React Native, definitely much more people subscribe to the React Native subreddit. But Flutter's definitely starting to get more subscribers. So there's not really any clear consensus. It's really hard to tell, but you can definitely get a sense from the community that it's getting more popular. You see a lot of excitement. You see a lot of people just expressing interest in it. They have a showcase with apps. The biggest one they have right now is Realtor.com on the Flutter showcase, and then also the Google Ad Manager, I think, is on there as well. SpaceX Go was built with Flutter, and they've currently got a 4.6 star rating, so they're doing really well with that. Okay, so that said, let's get into the actual architecture of how it works. The docs describe it as providing a set of widgets managed and rendered by Flutter's framework and engine. And so the two key takeaways from here are widgets and the engine. Widgets are completely key to Flutter. It's just widgets are everything in Flutter. Everything in the UI is a widget. If you look at this example, so this is a complete app. So this is building an app, and all it's doing is showing an app bar and the text hello world. So this text here is a widget, and then it's contained in this widget that just centers things. And then this text is a widget that's inside of an app bar widget. And then that's all contained in a scaffolding, which is just a view widget. And then that's all inside of the main app widget. And this ends up working really well because every one of these widgets, like this center text widget, you could make this your own single custom widget if you just wanted centered text. And then you could have multiple centered text on different pages that you have in your custom widget. Or you could create a custom widget and then publish it on PubDev, which is the Dart version of NPM or NuGet. And the widgets can be used between mobile and web and desktop. So they make these great little components that can just be used everywhere. And they're very simple, so it makes the UI very easy to use. And if you look at this example they have of an app here for a recipe, if you break it down into the components, it's just 2 rows for the photo and then the information on the side, and then the information on the side is just a bunch of components, and then inside the components it's just text and then icons. So it's a lot of information, but each individual thing, all it is icons and text, rows and columns. Each one is just individual web widgets all tied together. So going back to that original quote about widgets being powered by the engine, this is where it gets really opinionated. When you look at Xamarin or you look at React Native, everything eventually compiles down to the native controls. So if you're on Android, you're going to have native list views and native buttons, native alerts, and on iOS, the same thing. On Flutter, nothing compiles down to native. Everything is rendered by this Skia-powered C++ engine, and it's drawn as UI. So it ends up being this very fluid, very beautiful 60 frame per second UI, but they are not native controls. And if you're okay with that, it's great, but you need to understand that it is a very opinionated framework, and it is intentionally not drawing native controls. So if you look at the top of the stack, even on top of the widgets that you're drawing, there are two choices for Material UI or the Cupertino iOS widgets. So when you're choosing your widgets, you actually, even for things like buttons, you have to choose, do you want it to look like a Google app or do you want it to look like an iPhone app? It's not going to load up on an Android phone and say, oh, I know I'm on an Android phone. Let's put the navigation bar at the top, and when I show an action sheet, I'll show it in the middle. And then when I'm on an iPhone, I'll show the action sheet coming up from the bottom. It's not going to do any of that on purpose. Every app is going to look exactly the same on every device. And there's ways around this. If you have these two buttons, then in your code, you can actually hard code it to say, if I'm running on Android, then show a Material UI button, and if I'm running an iOS, show the iOS button. And there's actually components on PubDev that'll do some of that for you. They don't have all of the controls yet, but they've got a lot of them. And they actually did, when I was first looking at this, they don't have this anymore, but they ran a survey and asked, should the Flutter framework move this direction and show the platform specific look and feel, or should we keep it as it is? And who knows which direction they take, but they are very upfront that the way they want Flutter to be used is for brand first designs, for applications where you're okay with the app looking like your brand wants it to look, not specifically following the Google and Apple guidelines. Okay, so moving away from UI a bit into Dart. I had never used Dart before, of course, but it's not hugely different from most other languages. There are a few gotchas. All types are nullable. There isn't anything like a non-nullable type, so you just have to make sure you're always doing the null checks. There's no such thing as private, public, or protected. Every variable, every class, every function is public. To make it private, you just start the name with an underscore. It has generics and async await and lists and dictionaries and all the standard stuff you would expect from a normal language. State management is included. If you're doing just a single widget, then you can use just set state like you'd expect. If you're used to React, it's very similar to that. So looking at this widget here, it's a home page with a bottom navigation bar, and then you can see the page starts out and we're on the first tab. And then there's a tap event passing in the new index, and then that just sets the state. So very simple. The state is just existing in this one widget. So when this widget goes out of view, that state will be gone. For application level state, they have a service component that they call provider, and they recommend any app size, small or huge. If you need app level state, just use this provider service. And then they've got a page in their documentation on how to set it up, and it's a one pager. It's very simple to set up. I'm not going to go through it in this talk because the sample code we're going to do doesn't use app level session state, but it's simple to set up. If you're coming from Angular or React and you're used to Redux or MoX or anything like that, there's also components for that. So if your team feels at home using those things, it's real easy to just continue using them, and you don't have to switch the way you're used to doing things. You can just jump right in, continue doing that. So let's do a mobile demo, and we'll see how it all looks. So here, let me stop debugging. Here's a simple app. It's very small. I got Ken in my corner. I don't know if you can see him. I'm going to move him out of the way. No offense, Ken. Okay, so this is a simple app. If you've seen any of my talks on React Native or Xamarin, you've already seen it. It's the exact same app. It gets the user's location from GPS. This simulator is set to Microsoft Alpharetta. And then it takes that location and queries the petfinder.com API and shows us dogs that are available for adoption right near that location. So we can see Ralphie here. He is available right now for adoption if you live near Microsoft Alpharetta. We don't care about cats, only dogs. So that's the app. And we'll look through the code. And I'm not, if I can find the terminal, we're not going to go through how to install it. The docs are simple enough. It's not hard. I mean, you pull it down. You have to add some stuff. It does most of it for you. I will show how to install a new package. I'm sorry, a new project. You just do Flutter, create, whatever you want to install it. I've got most of the packages cached, so it won't take me long. The first time, of course, it takes longer, but you can see it took 2 seconds. I think it's lying to us. It's going to take a little longer than 2 seconds.
It says it's done.
It says it's done. So it does this cool thing at the end too, with these check marks. And I'll clear it and show just that part. So at any point after you're installed, you can run Flutter Doctor, and it just does a check of your environment. And it checks to see if you've got Xcode installed, if you've got the Android SDK installed, if you've got the IntelliJ and Visual Studio extensions installed and up to date, and if you've got devices actually connected so that you can run your code. And hopefully you get all the check marks, and if not, you know what's wrong. So it's yelling at me, CocoaPods aren't up to date. And I knew that. It started warning me that last week, and I didn't want to update it because I don't want to update anything about Xcode right before a demo. And I don't care about IntelliJ because I like Visual Studio Code. But it's very cool. The one time I did have trouble getting Flutter to run, I ran this and it said, here's what's wrong, and I fixed it, and then everything started working again. It would have been really cool to have this in Xamarin like 3 years ago when stuff was so flaky. So, okay, so that's how you create it, and then you end up with something like this. And for every platform, if you're on the production channel, that's just going to be iOS and Android. If you're on the beta channel, it'll be iOS, Android, and web. And then if you're on alpha, iOS, Android, web, and Mac OS, you're going to see these folders. And if you're looking like iOS, it's created the Xcode project. So you've got info playlist, and you got the assets folder, and then Mac OS will be the same thing. Android has Gradle. Web just has some icons and an index file. There's not much in web. There's a pub spec file, which is packages that we've added. So we've got this location for GPS. And if we go to pub.dev, we can see location is this guy here. And so if you're familiar with NPM or NuGet, pubdev is pretty much the same thing, just for Dart. So location is, I think, the only package we're using here. That's not a standard one. And it shows you this one's available for Android, iOS, web, and Mac. Although I never bothered setting it up for a Mac. I couldn't get it working. I didn't have time. And then it shows you how to install it. Very similar to NPM. The one annoying thing about pubdev is it doesn't tell you how many people are using it. Normally you get that little, how many installed it today, when was it last updated, all that. You don't get any of that. which I find kind of annoying because I had really relied on that to know, like, is this package any good? The only thing you really get is this Flutter favorite icon, and they say it's a favorite, you know, based on if the license is good and a few other things. And then you can see the list of all their favorites. But like, there's multiple packages for GPS. So I don't know how they picked one. Like, I tried this one, it didn't even work. So that's not a great indicator. But overall, PubDev is good. And to add a package, all you have to do is add it to your PubSpec file. You save it, and it'll instantly add it. You don't even have to restart your app most of the time. Okay, so all the code is in this lib folder, and all Dart programs start with just a main. And so you can see, and let me know if this code is too small for anybody. But you can see main is just starting main app, and main app is just building a material app, so material UI app, just with a set of routes. And our main route is a main page, and then there's a secondary page of puppy detail page. So if we look at our main page, there's a lot here, but mainly all we need to care about is it's a page that extends some state, and when the state loads, it calls this pet finder service. And then if we look at pet finder service, you can see some example of Dart, and it should be pretty readable, even without having known much about Dart. I find it readable, at least. Hopefully you guys do as well. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not actually click on it. Okay, there we go. That should be better. So, so the pet finder service, you can see it's getting an access token. Pet finder's got this weird thing where you got to get a new token every 30 seconds. This is our location component from PubDev. And I mean, this is awesome. I'm not checking to make sure the user gave permission. There should be code for that, but all I have to do is call location get location, and then I have a lat and long. And this works on all the platforms: Android, iOS, web, desktop. I don't have to change code for any of that. I don't have to check for, you know, what platform I'm running on. Just that one line of code, and then it works everywhere. And then just standard, you know, calling HTTP, that's all built into to Flutter, or I guess more accurately built into Dart. So if we go back to main screen, let me run this just to give a bit more overview of how Visual Studio Code works. You can see it's seeing this iPhone simulator, and you can see all the devices here. So I'm going to leave it on that simulator and then just start debugging. And then
I assume this all comes from a Flutter plugin.
It does, yeah. So when you install Flutter, it sets it all up. And then you get some really nice integrations, and you can even create new projects right within, yeah, there we go. Right within Visual Studio, you can create new projects. It's very nicely integrated together. I will say most of the work has been done on mobile. The web and desktop aren't quite as nicely done in Visual Studio. Okay, so while that's loading, we'll look at this main screen, and we're getting our list of animals from the pet finder service, and that goes into the body, and just goes into this widget called Puppy and List. And Puppy and List is just a row with a circle avatar and then a name. So very simple. It looks a little weird just because depending on what framework you're coming from, you're used to either HTML or XML or XAML or something. But you know, it's not too bad. This circle is this here, and then this name is all of this, which is a bit verbose, but not too bad. Well, then I guess this divider is, if you can see it, that little gray line. So then when we click on it, it goes over to the picture here, which is this screen here. It's just an image. So what's cool is, sorry, let me switch screens again. Because we're all on top of that C++ rendering engine, and we're not actually showing native controls, Flutter gives us a ton of animation widgets. So, I mean, you can scale and rotation and fading. And so what we're going to use is this hero one. And there's just a ton of easy animations that you can do with very little work. And this is one of the ones that has a video. I'm not going to play it, but just to play and pause, you can see it's only 1.5 minutes long. So it's not like you have to watch this 30-minute tutorial on how to do it. Just 1.5 minutes and you can see how it's done. The hero, the basics of it is, if you have any widget, and we've got that circle image, the user can tap on it, and this is one screen, and it's going to move to another screen, and it can be another widget. So you tap on the circle, and it'll smoothly animate to the next screen while the mobile app is transitioning between screens. So it's going to figure all of that out. The screen transition, the transition between whatever the first widget and the second widget is, no matter what those two are, the animation between placement, it'll do all of that. All you have to do is wrap this first widget with a hero and the second widget with a hero, and then tell it the relationship between those two. And you tell it the relationship with a tag. So we'll go back here. I'm not sure what that was. And we'll go to our puppy and list. Where was our circle? Okay, our circle avatar. And this is what the plugin does that's really cool, is all we have to do is refactor this and wrap it with a widget. And then we can say we want to wrap it with a hero. Oh, sorry, it's a capital H. Okay, so now we're wrapped with a hero. And then we have to give it a tag. And our tag is, we're going to use a puppy ID. And then we do the same thing here for this image. We're going to refactor it, wrap it with a widget, and use the hero. And then again, as long as the tag matches, then it'll be fine. So now it'll automatically reload. And when we click on it, you can see, hopefully that goes through the screen share. You can see when you click on it, the image expands automatically out into the square. Does that translate through the screen share, Ken?
Yeah, actually
okay,
the animation comes through pretty well.
Okay, good. So just super easy animations. 60 frames per second on all devices, and there are just tons of them that you can choose from. Opacity and fading and spinning and all kinds of stuff, and they're super easy. And then also what you saw on there, here, I'm going to change the image on this second screen because I have some, this one, I have some cleaned up code that'll make it look a little bit better. Also, what you saw while we were doing that is the hot reload is just very, very quick. So on this page here, we're in a column, so we can add more children here. So if we wanted to add description here, just instantly adds it there. And remember, objects are always nullable. So I'll say, check if that's null, and if not, just add empty string. Yeah, see, that guy's empty. Another one. Let me get a good example. Okay, and then if we wanted to say refactor this, add some padding so that we don't get it going right up against the edge. That'll instantly add it there. Or if instead of this child being just straight text, I can refactor and put that in a column and then add the dog's name. So even though this syntax and this style of creating UI is foreign and takes a little while getting used to, because they have this easy refactoring and because they have the instant reloading, it really makes it easier to redesign the UI on the fly and see your changes instantly. And they also offer the ability to do multiple devices, so we can see the changes on the iPhone and the Android and the tablet all at the same time, make one change, and then it'll reload multiples at the same time. Okay, what am I doing on time? Okay, so that's mobile. Let me check my list. I think that's everything. Yeah. Okay, so let me show web. So web is currently beta. Mobile's on the stable channel. So to get web, you got to switch to beta. To get desktop, you have to switch to dev. And then if you're really crazy, you could switch to the master channel with the daily check-ins, but I wouldn't recommend that. To switch a channel, you just, in a terminal, go Flutter channel beta or Flutter channel dev, and then Flutter upgrade. And then you have to enable web with Flutter config enable web, or Flutter config enable Mac OS desktop. And then when you create a new project, it'll automatically create those platform folders. If you have an existing project and you switch channels afterwards, then you just need to go back to that project and then just type Flutter create, and it'll create the missing platform projects. To run web, you type Flutter run development Chrome, and then you can build it with Flutter build web. And when you build it, it'll create the static HTML and JavaScript files, and you can just push those straight to GitHub pages. It'll run completely statically. You don't need any, special web server or anything. It's very light. Okay, so a web demo. If I have my terminal, no, not that one. One second. Okay. So Flutter run dev Chrome OS. It's taking a minute. Oh. It's a good thing I wrote it down, huh? Yeah, it's just Chrome. So it always says this is taking an unexpectedly long time. I've literally never seen it not say that. So I don't know why it's unexpected.
Apparently has unrealistic expectations.
Right? Okay, so it's going to ask my location because we've got that geolocation, and then it'll come up. And obviously this is not the best UI for a website. I mean, I would not suggest making a UI that looks like this. But considering how we put absolutely no thought into it and 0 code changes, it's kind of cool that it just works. So you will notice the UI is not exactly the same. So if we look at Quincy, let's see, Quincy. I don't think the API always returns it, but you'll notice like on here, the picture is perfectly at the top and looks nice and pretty. And here it's not. And then we get this little warning at the bottom. Bottom overflowed by 600 and something pixels. So they have some documentation that talks about adaptive UI and how to deal with the different resolutions. So considering how we haven't done that yet, this isn't bad. But you definitely can't just assume that because it runs on a phone and a tablet, it's going to work great on mobile. But that's really not a huge problem because, like I said, you don't want a website that looks like this anyway. You can share a lot of your code, but you're going to want a different UI between the two of them. Another concern with web, and a lot of this is just because it is still early and is still in their beta phase. It's not the easiest thing to debug. If you look at an inspection, because we didn't write this in HTML and JavaScript, you don't get a lot of useful information looking at the source. It's, you know, it's all there, compiled stuff. And you can't really do stop, except if we look at where we ran this. Okay, so they give us this URL for the debug service. And then there's a tool called Flutter Dev Tool. So we can connect to that. And then from Flutter Dev Tool, we can see our complete application. So here's our UI. You can see all the little elements that we created. We can see, we'll see a lot of this says it's disabled because we're in a web application, but we can see our source code and you can search for anything. So here's our pet finder API. But then if we set a breakpoint and reload it, nothing happens. So to go around this, what we can do is if we go to our service, we can tell it what the documents say to do is to say debugger with no arguments. And you have to import Dart developer to do this. The docs aren't quite right in this case, but if you say anything in here, then when you debug, or I'm sorry, when you reload, it should stop here. And it's not going to. We might have to restart completely. Oh, wait. Nope. Yeah, on web, it's just really inconsistent. I don't think it wants that. Yeah. Debugging just really, really inconsistent on web, and mobile's the same thing. Also on web, you don't get hot reload. So if we change the title of our app, it doesn't hot reload. You can see it's still showing the old one. All we can do is do the full, I'm sorry, it doesn't hot refresh. All we can do is the full hot reload. So trying to debug a UI or even trying to just design the UI is much, much slower on web, because every time you make even the smallest change, it has to completely reload the application. And you do literally have to manually press uppercase R. Although if you press lowercase r, it just assumes you meant uppercase, to be fair. But it won't change just because you press save, which is annoying. But to be fair, it's a beta, so we can't complain too much. And they're making a lot of progress. Also, I don't know. Sorry, that's a comment for Mac. So it's getting there, but it's definitely a work in progress. I will point out, because I should, let me stop this. The dev tools to install it is Flutter pub global activate dev tools. It's a little hidden, and then to run it is just Flutter pub global run dev tools, and then it's a web-based tool. Oh, it's yelling because I already have it running. It gives you this address, and then you have to manually open it. It doesn't automatically start. So hopefully that tooling will get better. And then of course they point out you don't want to make a blog with this. This isn't something that you'd create a very text-intensive website for. This is something to create like a PWA for. Something that, is somewhat similar to a tablet or a mobile app. That there's certainly use cases for a Flutter web app. Not everything's going to work. Okay, so desktop, Mac OS is in alpha. Windows and Linux are kind of in an alpha, but literally the only documentation on Windows and Linux is a sentence saying that there's no documentation yet on Windows and Linux. They do say, though, that if you are trying to use it and you're running into troubles, then to feel free to go ahead and submit GitHub issues and just say, like, hey, I'm trying to use desktop, I'm on this environment, and here's the issues I'm having. So they're working on it, but it's a little bit like further than alpha if you're on Windows and Linux. And I haven't tried it. I've tried Mac, and it's working. There's not a lot of hardware support yet. I wanted to make an app that showed a little, what do you call, system tray icon, and there's no support for that. And they even said, like, we don't really want to do that, but it works. So let me show that. I will say I couldn't get geolocation working. I had to take that out. So I'll run an older version of the code without that. And again, it's just Flutter run development Mac OS. And it'll build that. Uh-oh. Either every puppy in Atlanta has been adopted or this is not working. Okay, there we go. Here's read. Okay. I will say, I think the UI looks better on Mac OS than web. It just seems to fit the environment better. And again, you get that warning at the bottom that it overflowed by 200 pixels. When you do a release mode of web or desktop, you don't see that warning. I mean, you still have the problem. There's still the overflow and the UI is still wrong, but you don't see the stripes and you don't see that red and white error. But when you're in debug mode, it's just a warning that, hey, you screwed up your UI. You've got items overlapping. You should probably fix this before going to release mode. And then if you just ignore it and don't fix it, then it at least gets rid of the warning. So that's it for Mac OS. It's very, very early. You have the same debug tool with DevTools, but again, there's not a lot you can do to it. What I've found so far to get around the debugging issues is, very old school, lots of print statements. It's just called print in Dart, and you just print all over the place and then just try to read the console logs. That's about all you can do. Also on Mac, there just seems to be a lot of errors that are thrown. So when you try to get that URL to give to the DevTools debugger, you got to scroll all the way up and then try to find it. And that just seems to be usual, I guess, just because it's such an early alpha. But it works. And again, like, we've literally changed no code whatsoever from the mobile app, and the web in Mac is just like this free add-on that we got for doing nothing. So we can't complain too much. Okay, and again, yeah, to run Mac OS, Flutter run D Mac OS, Flutter build Mac OS to get the binaries. Okay, and that's all I got. Any Q&A?
Now there's a question about the availability of the puppies.
Yes.
Sounds like Jim wants to adopt Ranger.
Yes, this is actually the live Pet Finder API, and I am using on the Mac. I wasn't able to get geolocation open, but on web and mobile, I am using the address of Microsoft Alpharetta.
Cool. Yeah, if
Which
you have,
oh, this is Ranger, yeah.
Yeah. Just raise your hand or unlock your mic and ask away.
I like how Ranger is dog friendly.
Hates people, but loves dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way.
I have cats.
I was a little late. I saw that you started the dev tools via the command line. Is there a reason you didn't use the integration with VS Code?
I could not get it working.
I haven't had troubles, so that was one thing. You kind of sounded like you knocked some points down on a Flutter for it, but I'm on the because I'm on the master branch. I don't know if the master branch is like the one you get by default when you install, but haven't had any trouble with it, and it's actually really smooth.
So master is actually the very lowest branch where you get the daily check-ins. Have you had a lot of luck with that?
I have actually. I've only started really. I only really been using Flutter for maybe hardcore for the last couple of weeks in preparation for the hackathon this weekend that I participated in, and
the Flutter days.
So, yeah, and so I used it throughout the hackathon. I didn't have any trouble, and I feel like the web support's a little better on it as well.
I will say, I guess if you're gonna go all the way to the alpha branch, you might as well go to master.
And it sounds like they're making progress. Maybe fix some of the things that you're running into, Brad.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's been, I mean, it's definitely, I'm having better experience than I was on the default branch.
They do seem to be very responsive. It's encouraging to see how much effort they're putting into it, into the tooling, the documentation, it's great.
Yeah, it really is.
Any more questions out there? Oh, we got some more coming in.
How would I compare Flutter versus Xamarin overall dev experience for typical line of business app? So I am. I have this test phone for Android, and there's this old lady in Tennessee who calls me on the number, and I can't explain to her that I'm not the aunt she's looking for. Anyway, so I am incredibly biased. Xamarin has been very good to me. Like, I mean, you know, Ken, I've got a Xamarin grill badge on my car.
It's practically paid for a Porsche.
Xamarin paid for my Porsche, yes. So from that perspective, from the emotional perspective, I love Xamarin. I'm very comfortable in it. Otherwise, though, you know, it always comes down to when people compare React Native and Xamarin. I always say the answer is if you know JavaScript, go with React Native. If you know C#, go with Xamarin. I mean, they're that close. It's just what you're based on. But from Flutter, no one knows Dart. As far as just the platform itself, I think they're very comparable. I think the one thing Xamarin still has going for it is a lot of corporations are very, very comfortable being able to pick up the phone and call and pay Microsoft money. I know we've done it at LivePerson. Thank you, Ken. And I know some corporations are not at all comfortable getting into bed with Google. As far as if you take all of that out of consideration, though, I think they're very comparable just back to back without the financials and without the emotional component. I think what we're really going to wait for, though, is, you know, we got the Realtor.com out there and we've got the Google Ads app, which doesn't quite count. I think we need a big player to come out and say, hey, this is our Flutter app and it's doing well. And we don't quite have that yet.
Yeah, so my company, we've been using Ionic for a while, which is just, oh man, I don't know. It's just so toxic with how often everything breaks with the web views and just the ecosystem in it. And so I got a strong feeling just by the talks we'll be switching to something like React or Xamarin. But I really love Flutter. But I don't think I'm gonna be able to convince anybody until, like you're saying, this is just more mature and actually big players have adopted it.
Mm-hmm. What we really liked about it is, you know, we don't, our apps, even the public apps, are only used by companies internally, if that makes sense. So our apps are only used by customer service agents. So really, it's fine if they don't adhere 100% to Google and Apple's design guidelines. But at the same time, they need to be easy to use and they need to be comfortable to use. It's not uncommon for a customer service agent to use our app for 8 hours a day. And if you're using something for 8 hours a day, it is not fun if the app sucks. So we really liked how Flutter just was fun to use when the app was done. The animation was so smooth, and little things like that really make an app fun to use. But no one is going to say, hey, for the next 2 sprints, we're working on animation. You don't get approval for that. But with Flutter, you just kind of get that built in, and that really goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought there were some packages, some plugins for Xamarin that had a bunch of kind of common animations you could drop in as well. But
they're starting to. In that hero animation I did,
yeah.
We actually found a hero animation for Xamarin, and our app has that now.
Nice.
And it works pretty well. But it took more work and a third-party component to get it to work in Xamarin.
Yeah, I mean the Flutter methodology of basically wrapping the from and to and giving it an ID. Just, hey,
oh, it's beautiful. And in Xamarin, it's not 60 frames per second. Like you can see, it's not nearly as smooth. But I was happy when it was done. I was really proud of it.
Yeah, well, if you're drawing all of your UI with a powerful graphic engine, then yeah, you can pretty much do whatever you want.
I mean, it's basically a gaming engine at this point.
Yeah, I've been trying to think of a way, how do I describe it to colleagues and friends and stuff, and I'm starting to lean more towards the it's like Unity but focused on 2D UI.
Yeah, I've heard the Unity comparison before, and it's interesting that you think they've gone so far away from the native way to do it, and then you think, but it's Google doing it.
Right.
We got any more questions out there? Don't be shy. You're not first anymore.
Randy asked if we can see more puppies.
Right. I mean, there we go. Ferret the dog.
This dog is 75% ears.
And wears pants.
I think that's a boy. That looks a lot like my dog.
I was gonna say.
Before we started feeding her. I think this one's got to be my favorite.
Yeah.
I mean, how is this dog not adopted yet?
There you go, Randy.
I'm in the market. I watched a documentary on Hulu about Dog for the Blind over the weekend. Pretty interesting.
I have heard with everyone staying home, dog adoptions have gone like way up.
So you mentioned guys have only been releasing internal Flutter apps, then you haven't had to like go through the process of releasing a public Apple.
No, we did not end up releasing to the stores.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering, like you said, how strict they are with the UI, the UI standards. You know, I feel like, I don't know. I guess if you're using like Materials UI, yeah, iOS specifically. I'm pretty sure Android would be fine on, but you know, iOS.
Yeah. I don't think it'd be a problem. I have done Ionic apps before, and it wasn't an issue.
All right. Well, I guess if we don't have any more questions coming in, then I suppose this is a wrap. I'll get a hold of the recording and hopefully I'll be able to make it available more easily than would be the default with a Teams recording. So I'll play with that a bit, and if I'm able to make it available, I will send out a note to everybody on the meeting and let you know where it is, how to get to it.
All right. Thanks, man.